I'm a big fan of Ken Robinson, and I just love the way that he talks about intelligence and creativity. And my own sort of journey down that track lends how does actually play form the basis of the development of creativity. And I thought I'd just dovetail into his presentation tonight and start talking about intelligence and how does it connect to consciousness, and what we mean by consciousness and how can we improve the depth and quality of our consciousness. And when you think about these questions that people often ask, you know, how can I actually create a life that I desire? How can I get more of something that I do want? And how can I sort of, you know, put aside those things that appear in my life that I don't want? How can I actually get a greater sense of purpose? How can I get a greater sense of financial abundance? And when you think about those sorts of questions, you start to realise that they've been asked for an eternity. And so if they've been asked for an eternity, why isn't it so that more people achieve the lifestyle that they want? And when you start thinking about reality, you know, reality is whatever you experience now, in however you experience that reality. But if you were to change that reality, if you wanted to actually gain access to a different one, then you would need to become a deliberate creator of that reality. And you've got to start thinking about to the extent to which you deliberately create the reality that you experience, or whether it kind of sort of sneaks up on you and it's somehow created through this other process. So we've got to start thinking about how do we understand energy, how do we apply the rules, how does consciousness develop, how is it expressed, can I increase the quality and density of consciousness? And then can I begin to deliberately create my experience? And if you can put all of those things together, of course you can. And as you deliberately create your experiences, you can actually be, do, or have, or experience anything that is that you want to experience. And so I'm going to start thinking about conscious causation. So how do we cause a reality through our consciousness? And it requires that we become familiar with the laws of energy, but also familiar with the three laws of thought. And they've got to be learned to be applied in a particular order. It's just like, you know, if you're baking something, if you're baking a cake, you've got all the ingredients there, but if you put them in the wrong order, then, you know, something is just not going to work. So yes, you might have all of the ingredients, and yes, you might know, you know, what to expect from it, but if they're out of sequence, and so we have to start thinking about, if they're out of sequence, the flow-on effect, what would be the flow-on effect if we got these things out of sync? And really, it actually, you get to not experience what it is that you say that you want, but you get to experience more of what you say that you don't want. And so the first law states that which is like unto itself is drawn. And there is nothing in the universe that is not affected by that law. You know, like attracts like. So we've got to start thinking about, now, how do we open up that? The second law says that which I give thought and attention to. And the magic word there is attention. And that which I believe or expect is. And so that creates the reality. And the third law is that which I am, and I am willing to allow all others to be that which they are. And that's the biggest cruncher for people, because we tend not to allow other people to be as they are. So it's either what you do or what you don't do with your conscious mind that somehow is the key to the outcomes that you want to experience. Whether those experiences are positive or negative. So it's what you do with your conscious mind or don't do with your conscious mind. So if you think about consciousness, so how conscious is your conscious mind? And where does it go when it's not conscious? So classical physics maintains that every single thing is made of matter, and that everything can be reduced to these sort of the elementary particles of matter. And then those elemental particles become the building blocks of matter. And so they say this is where causality arises. It arises from the bottom up. And what they mean by that, it stems from the interaction. So the term for their causality is upward causation. And it's the interaction of all the basic building blocks. So there's elemental particles like atoms make molecules, molecules make cells, cells make a brain, and so forth. And so it starts from the bottom and that's the way that it's shaped. So now when you think about that, where does the human sit? And can the human be consciously causal? If consciousness is built from the bottom up, can we be consciously causal? So in this view, what humans bring, you and I think of as free will, doesn't actually exist in this model. It's only an epiphenomenon, secondary to the causal power of matter. And you're going to start scratching your head, is that so? And say, well, where does the role of intelligence play, or where does the role of creativity come in? If everything is, a bottom-up experience. So Einstein says, well, I think I've got a new theory on that, and I don't agree with the classical physicists. So he gave us a way of breaking free of our conditioned results. He gave us a way of breaking free from the way that we think about the world. And his discoveries presented us with a world, a universe that was actually much more fluid and malleable. And it overturned the classical view of the universe as being governed by the immutable laws of time and space. And so it's much more plastic and much more malleable than people think it is. Now, while quantum physics doesn't actually deny the causal potency of matter, it actually does take an opposite view. And basically, it suggests that everything starts with the observer, and that consciousness is the ground state of all being. Now, it's important to understand the context of the observer. So, if consciousness starts with the observer, and consciousness is the ground state of all being, what happens when you're not observing? What's happening to your experience? What's happening to your reality if you're just going about your day in whatever fashion that you sail through the normal day? So our free will is real, says Amit Goswami, who's one of the noted quantum physicists in the world today. When we act in the world, we are really acting with causal power. But the question you've got to ask is, how do I consciously and purposely act in the world? Or does the environment that I find myself in act upon me, and I just go along with the environment? There's one other thing. An observer's looking is essential in order to manifest possibility into actuality, or possibility into probability. And it's only when the observer looks, only then does the entire thing become manifest, which actually includes time itself. So when the observer is looking. So then how do you use the power of downward causation to bring out this innate intelligence that Ken was talking about? How do you use the power of downward causation or observing to bring out the creativity? How do you actually bring out the substance so that you can actually begin to consciously create and consciously shape the reality that you might want to achieve so that you can begin to achieve your ideal outcomes? Well, it appears that the secret lies in two words, and one of them is intention and the other is attention. So for most people, there's always a point of breakdown. For most people, they set out with an idea, they set out on their journey to achieve, but somewhere along the line, they either take a track that way or a track that way. But when you really add it up, most people only ever live a fraction of the potential that they're capable of living. And so somewhere in that process, there's a point of breakdown, and they just get off track. And so we've got to start thinking, well, where's the point of breakdown? When attention is separated from intention. In other words, I intend to do something, I start off attending to that intention, but somewhere along the line I get distracted. And when I'm distracted, attention is separated from intention. And as soon as the separation comes, that's the point of breakdown for most people, because the observer is no longer there. The observer is no longer attending. And so when the observer is no longer there, then external forces take over and it does the shaping. So the environment does the shaping. So when we break down, when attention is disconnected from intention, then possibility is removed from actuality. And so we're going to start thinking about how do we become aware of that, and how do we stay on track. So I want you to understand that consciousness imposes form on energy. Consciousness imposes form on energy, and everything is the building block of energy. And so the absolute theory that's coming through from the cutting edge of neuroscience and the cutting edge of the quantum physics is the primacy of consciousness. In other words, consciousness itself is first cause. So the observer observing is first cause. And you've just got to think about how long does it take the observer to observe? How long do you have to keep attending to what it is you want before you actually manifest it? Most people reach a point of breakdown before the length of time. And so, you know, the pathways to actually getting what you want are actually very, very clearly defined. So, how do we use downward causation to begin the necessary work to move past our points of breakdown? Well, I'm just going to start thinking about thoughts. Now, thoughts are energy patterns which inform a person's level of consciousness. And so you can have the thought forms of fear, well, that will then inform your level of consciousness. You can have the thought forms of anxiety, well, that will inform your level of consciousness. You can have the thought forms of anger, and that will inform your level of consciousness. When we go back to Ken, you can have the thought forms of creativity, and that will inform your level of consciousness. Most thoughts are not original. That's exactly what Ken was saying. They've been planted there for us to remember and recall, nor are they consciously intentional. And so if most thoughts are not original, if most thoughts are not consciously intentional, then you've got to start to ask the question, am I shaping my reality? Am I creating my reality? Or is there some external process going on that's shaping the reality for me? So thoughts, for most people, are actually formed through hidden habituation, which represent repetition of old information. And anything that's repetition of old information doesn't allow people to evolve out of their current models. And so people experience similar results year in, year out, year in, year out. They don't evolve out of those old thought patterns. And so what most people do is they play those thoughts over and over again, which means that they're observing from those old thought patterns, which means that they're actually creating their old world, and it just recreates all the time. So consciousness is deliberate. So it's creativity is deliberate. Intelligence is deliberate. Consciousness is deliberate and intentional. And the latest in research says that attention is also deliberate and also inherently intentional. So the secret is to have a very, very clear intention and have a very, very clear strategy to keep attending to your intention and to make your intention the most important thing in your life, because once the two are separated, we're back to square one again. So it's going to be directed. Attention must be directed to something. And whatever that thing is, it actually must exist prior to the activation of attention. Because if that something doesn't exist, then you can't attend to it. And so most people are confused when you say clearly what it is that you want. They can't say. They can tell me everything that they want in their life, but they tell you exactly what it is that you want. It doesn't exist, and if it doesn't exist, you can't attend to it. If you can't attend to it, you're separated intention and attention. That's the point of breakdown. And so we don't get the life that we want, we get some other life instead. So when you start thinking about intention, and when you start thinking about levels of consciousness, and these can all be calibrated, and we can give levels of consciousness a number, and it's not difficult to find out where most people are, but conscious intention doesn't really begin until the level of 310. Now, most of the world population exists under the level of 200. It can be physically calibrated for people. So most people confuse intention with a sense of desire at 125. So they don't even get to the stage where they have clarity and can begin the intention. And so we've got to start thinking about how do we work our way up, how do we increase the density and the quality of something that's called intention. There was a great series of studies by Arian Mack and Irving Robb, and they discovered this process called inattentional blindness. If you're not attending to it, you're functionally blind to it. So they discovered that a sighted person in some situations can be every bit as blind as a non-sighted person. In other words, something can exist, you can actually lay your eyes on it, but you cannot perceive it. And the reason why we can't perceive it is because intention is separated from attention. So they wondered whether anything at all can be perceived without attending to it. And they came up with a working hypothesis that there is no perception. In other words, your brain can't put it together. Your eyes can take in the image, but your brain will not perceive it. There is no perception without consciously attending to what it is that you wish to see. So if you're not actively observing, you can't engage deliberate causation. And if you can't engage deliberate causation, you can't engage creativity and intelligence. And so we're left with the results of the reality that we're currently experiencing. The same thing is that enculturation destroys our ability to attend. Because as Ken said, if you think about what the education system is designed to produce, then it sort of shapes us in a way, and it destroys our ability to attend to creativity, it destroys our ability to attend to even the laws of thought. It also disconnects us from our high levels of consciousness, and so we can't work our way up into those higher levels. And it disconnects us from what we truly are potentially gifted to do. So the result is that few people get past their point of breakdown. And because they can't get past this point, they never manifest even a fraction of the potential that they're capable of manifesting. And hence their reality stays the same. So you become more purposeful with downward causation when you truly understand the relationship between the encultured you and your higher being. The extent to which you achieve success is the extent to which you can actually leave your enculturated self behind and then begin observing through a more powerful, consciously aware self. While mainstream science maintains this materialist sort of bottom-up perspective, a substantial number of scientists now are actually, developing a new paradigm where the primacy of DNA is everything. In other words, the primacy of DNA, primacy simply means first cause. So the first cause is consciousness, and their model, their scientific model, is the process of downward causation, not upward causation. And so a term that you're going to start hearing more if you keep following through this work is orchestrated objective reduction, which is a really big sort of scientific mouthful, which means that we can actually consciously control energy. And this is where it really gets interesting, because now it gives us a clue about how we can increase not only the quality but also the density of our consciousness. So we see consciousness as a self-organizing process. So we don't have to do anything. And it's on the edge between the quantum world and the classical world. It's a connection between the biological systems and the fundamental level of the universe. The fundamental level of the universe, a building block that we can actually tap into. And so the way we start thinking about it is just to understand a little bit of the anatomy of a neuron. And we've got all those little furry things. So if we consciously attend to something, those little furry things, which are called dendrites, they branch out and they connect up. And the more times that they connect up with other neurons, the denser and the more powerful that sort of neuronal connection comes to. But the interesting thing about this new theory is that we have one nerve into another nerve, but all of these little things here and the little connections between them. So if you get just one of those little furry things and you start to open up and you start to have a look at the inside of it, you start to think about there's a cytoskeleton there, and that cytoskeleton is full of self-assembling protein polymers. What we can do is we can increase the density. So if I blow that up, you can see that here is the inside of a nerve, one brain cell. And here are these little things that run across there, and these little microtubules. And the scientists now think that consciousness arises within those microtubules. And we can now use our mind to create more of these connections. So you'll see that some of these are not connected and some of these are connected. So if you start doing mindfulness training, you actually start to release a microtubule-associated protein, or a MAP for short. And they form a density of structure within those little microtubules, and the greater the density of the structure, the more consciousness we can bring to anything, and the more we can attend to what it is that we intend, and the less we will be given to distraction. So all is consistent not only with neurobiology and physics, but also with the spiritual traditions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and the Kabbalah. All of our consciousness occurs in a very special circumstance. And it's got to be isolated from environmental decoherence, which simply means it's got to be isolated from anything that distracts from the process. And once we can actually lock into that process, then we're on the threshold of consciously being able to create a deliberate reality. And I'll just leave it there.